I think a lot of people would agree that there are significant things in the world that feel wrong to them. And I think being a contrarian means identifying those things and boldly speaking out or acting against them.
What is it about humanity that makes us want to constantly change, iterate, and upgrade our societies?
Power is hard to share, and when you have groups with conflicting interests and desires and jurisdictions, I think there's a big question about how they're supposed to reasonably introduce these new organizational structures.
From the ancient hierarchies of the Egyptians to the gargantuan influence of Roman civilization throughout Europe and beyond, to the global impact of capitalism, there's been a constant evolution in the way we try to coordinate and navigate our communities through time. Now, faced with a digital future, some groups are preparing for the next big change, setting out their own plans to reform society as we know it.
I hope that the wisdom we get as humanity generally will undermine the power that politicians have. The system needs to change.
From biohackers pushing our biological limits to online country founders that are rethinking society, communities all over the world are trying to shape humanity's next chapter. I'm John Weeks, and this Upgrading Humanity series is brought to you by Digital Frontier, a media company for curious minds committed to uncovering the future. We're talking to pioneers in artificial general intelligence.
It'll be much bigger than the internet, much bigger than electricity even. It'll really change the world profoundly.
Experimental education.
All of our students are going to learn at least twice as fast as traditional school students.
And human enhancement.
All the chips in my body are protected by GDPR, so the authorities can't even ask me about them.
But first, focusing on the future of societies, human relationships, and social organization, what could real change to our communities actually look like?
Network States focuses on something starting with an online community, then they start getting land and get recognized internationally as an actual polity.
A cohesive group of people with a shared mission and shared resources.
To me, it's a way of using the technology that we have to find the people that I want to build with, the world that I want to live in.
Network states are the latest concept for future governance. What some might call virtual countries, an online community from all around the globe who come together online to rethink how society should be run, with some groups vying for land and even diplomatic recognition. A complicated subject, yes, but one that our journalist Isabel Castro knows all about.
The thing with network states is that everyone has their own idea of what the future of society should look like. There's no fixed right answer, and there's a lot of nuances to the changes people think should be made. I first became interested in the space because of these differing opinions and the fact that people were actively creating tools to support this future, even coming to live together in real life to try and test out their theories. After a year of covering the network state subculture community from afar, I knew it was time to get my boots on the ground and see what these gatherings were really like in person. So I attended my first Network Society gathering this month. It was organized in a camp in Austin, Texas. Housed in a children's summer camp on the outskirts of Austin, the gathering consisted of around 100 people, all involved in different ways with the network state community. There were young families, tech veterans, builders, and people who just felt society needed to change, who all came together to discuss their ideas. Over 4 days, we lived together in bunk beds, sang karaoke in the evenings, and sat around campfires making s'mores, all the while going deep into weighty topics like sovereignty, democracy, innovation, housing, and how groups adapt to crisis.
In my own personal life, I've experienced what it's like to have a sense of tribe, which is really what we're designed for as humans, from training with the Marine Corps, to being in Ukraine during a war zone, to being in Syria, where there's 5 million people who have fought ISIS and won. They form little local, they call them communes there. They have regular meetings where they decide how to distribute food and cooking gas, and they became twice as wealthy as the rest of Syria. We met a lot of people there who were trying to immigrate, trying to get into there, because of how much more stable it was.
Noah Chon Lee, founder of Via Prize, a crowdfunding platform, joined me at the camp and spoke about real-life examples he's seen of groups setting up their own tribes and thriving.
We met a lot of people there who were trying to immigrate, trying to get into there, because of how much more stable it was. And even as they're facing totalitarians who are very women's rights, anti-diversity and religion, trying to attack them because they uphold those values, they're still really strong and doing better than the areas around. So I'd like to see more examples like that, which are really a call to have harmony between what we were designed to live with in tribes and also this future we're moving towards with modern technologies, understanding how the world is changing.
Noah's vision for the network states of the future isn't bound by the need for sovereignty. Instead, he thinks it should revolve around community.
For me, it's important to stay grounded with the human aspect of we need a community and loved ones and people sharing and taking care of each other. And that's the most important thing, and everything else should be derived from that. And for me, in my own life, finding times when I didn't have community, it's a radically different life. It's a lot more difficult, and yeah, it's hard to feel like life's meaningful if you're not sharing it with people you really care about. So I think that's what we should really stay grounded in and make sure we're focused on empowering communities. And then it's great that we have disagreements about the best ways to go about this.
For Lewis, though, who was also at the camp, securing recognized sovereign status is key.
I think of this as like a good way for people to find their tribe and for people to have kind of self-sovereign communities.
Sovereignty was one of the key themes debated at the camp alongside the issue of physical location. Lewis told me for him, having that unique physical space is really important.
I'm extremely pro physical location. I lived in hippie co-ops in San Francisco for 5 years.
For Lewis, as well as others, while digitalization provides a connection point, it's only through physically meeting and even living together that this change can be solidified. Coming together in real life marks the difference between just talking about ideas and actually putting them into action. Everyone has their own idea on how to make these digital communities work in real life, and Lewis was no exception.
And so my personal idea of how this works out is that we essentially see a pseudo decommodification of assets. So currently we're at a camp that is being rented out. Several people here have hundreds of acres of land. There's a way in which if the community could organize well enough, we could on chain buy the land from those people without the need for thanks. And then because the community bought it, the asset becomes decommodified. It's no longer a tradable thing. It is just a community resource. And I kind of see the ideal implementation of network states being several communities owning several physical assets that operate in this sort of decommodified post-traditional structure way.
He admits the online space would play a significant part in any future network states though, and could help with the organization of these societies to become fairer spaces where individuals are empowered and less susceptible to manipulation from traditional centralized entities like companies and governments.
There's this really interesting tech project where I don't like the founder much. Let me explicitly state that. But I think the tech he builds is really interesting. The project is called Urbit. And the classic example is social media. When you scroll Facebook, what you're doing is accessing a centralized service, which is Mark Zuckerberg, and just essentially scrolling through their database of posts. Whereas on Urbit, the way that you would build a social networking protocol is you would actually build a protocol. This is what a post is, right? You store your post on your site, or on your computer, locally. And then because it has a networking protocol, what you can do is if I have an app, I can ask you for your post and ask someone else for their post. And so who I'm following is my feed and there's no optimization algorithm. And because the data is actually self-hosted, you host your posts, I host my posts, and it's end-to-end encrypted, there's not a lot of ways that bad centralized actors can enter the system and sort of pervert the social fabric.
There are problems with the social media that we have that's kind of destructive to our psyches in some senses, and I think due to a profit motive of some of the companies behind it, but it also works. People do connect with each other, do stay in touch with each other. My own personal hope is that the landscape that we have will shift as people create boundaries with social media that they use that will allow them to live in a better way than kind of glued to a phone screen.
Eileen Jubilee, a mum from Washington State, was also at the camp on a mission to, in her words, establish a new culture that helps people work together better in society. She had her own ideas for social media too.
There's nothing wrong with algorithms. It's just what is the algorithm trying to do? And so I would love to see us have more control over our algorithms, to the more, possibilities for controlling algorithms, making those more transparent rather than relying on, I'm thinking a lot about, Twitter and Facebook. The way that their algorithms work is that they rely on your unconscious cues in this micro movements on Facebook, it's micro movements. Twitter, it's more interactions. So I would like to see both people taking back their own algorithms by being more conscious about the things that they interact with and how they're training their algorithms. And then also from social media companies and whoever is building more technologies that we might use in the future, like more openness and optionality related to the algorithm.
It's clear from my conversations with Lewis and Eileen and others at the camp that they draw comparisons between social media today and real-life society. The idea that if people have true freedom online, then that could mean true freedom in their day-to-day life. While many see the best way to change society for the better as the creation of completely new network states, others aren't convinced that separation from existing cities and communities is the right approach. Instead, they're approaching change by reforming society from within.
I really rebel against the idea that we should just start from ground zero. I think we should start with what we have and challenge what we have and build from within. And I think that's much more exciting.
After the camp, I caught up with Gillian Morris, another futurist who attended the Network Society session.
I do believe that we should and can continue to evolve and innovate. And I think that's the thing that brings people interested in network societies together, is this idea of radical experimentation and pop-up cities and trying to find ways that we can remake society. But I don't believe that that needs to be, sort of in a new territory.
And Gillian thinks trying to set up new physical network states might not be the real feasible option some think it is.
There is virtually no space on Earth that is pleasantly, sustainably habitable by humans that isn't already. And so by necessity, you're going to be displacing people if you want to have your own new state where you get to make all the rules. And as someone who, I very much believe that people have rights to their land, and I don't want to see some sort of neo-colonial crypto state somewhere else. And I also think that there's a lot of hubris around this idea that you can just build from the ground up better than something that has evolved over generations or millennia.
If you're enjoying this episode, you'll probably like Digital Frontier magazine too. Our quarterly mag explores the intersection of humanity and technology, showcasing how innovation shapes our lives, cultures, and futures. Our Curiosity issue is replete with rabbit holes to jump down. Pick up your copy to find out how e-architects visualize the inner workings of the web, why the mirror world of augmented and mixed reality could divide or unite us, and why rewilding our imaginations is the only route back to the curious internet we're so nostalgic for. Pick up your copy online or at your local independent WH Smith travel stores, Waterstones, or at Barnes & Noble. You can also find those stories and more online at digitalfrontier.com. So, what opportunities exist for establishing a network state now in 2025?
So Prospera is this wonderful special economic zone project in Roatan.
Like when you see it in the real world, it's so visceral. There's so many things happening. It's a wonderful experience. I can recommend you just show up, don't buy a return ticket.
Well, one project that is actually functioning today and has even received recognition from its host country is Prospera, based on the island of Roatan, Honduras. While technically not a network state, Prospera does have its own e-residency program, a blossoming online community, and has been regarded as the poster child for what a network state could look like.
So I started in Prospera 2.5 years ago. I came here for the first time and I had the experience that many people who come here for the first time have, which is like, wow, this is really happening. So I kind of was seeing, hey, this is the new world, right? And this is like a practical way to realize these utopian ideas. And my goal has since become to make Prospera kind of the shining city on the hill, a great example that we can emulate in other places.
Nicholas Anzinger is the founder of Vitalia, a pop-up city in Prospera, focused on bringing the best minds and innovators in longevity biotech to the area.
Now we have like a very, very quickly developed, a really highly loyal community that's also in other places around the world, so very much following the network state template. And our goal was from the beginning, we want to get startups here, right? So startups that build here locally that are residing there. We are doing another pop-up city to bring even more people. So the goal is that we have 50 companies building here on the ground by the end of next year.
When it was set up, Prospera worked with the Honduran government to secure the authority to create its own regulatory system, attracting a number of startups in the tech space responsible for things like stem cell research, crypto, alternative insurance, and banking.
So the core of it is the idea of regulation through market incentives instead of by legislators or by the state. But the idea is that you have a flexible regulatory system that is kind of more decentralized, right? So for example, you have something like reciprocity with peer countries. So you have a common law-based legal system, and that's from common law best practices from all over the world. And common law is less prescriptive than legislation, right? Legislation is more preventative. There are these risks, and we're doing these regulations to make sure these risks don't happen, versus common law is more after the fact, right? So it's punishing when concrete harms are done, which you could argue is already sufficient regulation in most cases. So the Prospera idea is that that is sufficient in most cases, like, in software or in something like that, you don't need additional regulations. But then there are industries that are traditionally regulated, like healthcare, for example, where there are risks to unconsenting third parties. And businesses actively ask for regulation because it provides them with certainty. And you also need it to show to other jurisdictions what you're doing.
And Nicholas believes, as well as contributing to these new tech, science and financial communities, the specialised regulatory landscape provided by places like Prospera can actually uplift countries in poverty.
To me, why I went to Prospera, why I went to this field, is because I think it can have an enormous impact, especially in developing countries and in poorer countries. Because the core idea of it is that people and their talent aren't held back by natural factors, by geography, or by IQ or whatever, but instead they're held back by human institutions, right? So we succeeded in many Western countries and developed countries because we had better institutions, better rule of law, it's more secure, or private property rights. And this is what's lacking in Africa and in Latin America and many other places. So what we aim to prove is that building new or alternative or parallel institutions can really uplift the developing or the poor world.
In the last year, though, the current Honduran government has tried to roll out a retroactive ban on ZEDs, aka Zones for Employment and Economic Developments, like Prospera. This would mean the whole development's completely changing their approach to laws, regulation, and ultimately how people operate within it. Prospera and other ZEDs like it claim that they've already had a positive effect on local populations, with higher than average wages and access to new educational opportunities. Nicholas told us he's confident Prospera will survive this attempt to repeal the ZE law.
I came here 2.5 years ago, just when the new government came into power. And I'd say between then and now, the chances of it succeeding are rather higher than lower, right? Because we made tons of progress since, right? We have tons more people, and we've really also just taken much stronger roots in the country. 70%, 14 of my employees are from Honduras. 65% of Prospera residents are from Honduras. There is 1,000 direct jobs for Hondurans and probably 5,000 indirect jobs. So we've been growing despite having a very hostile government. And it speaks volumes that they tried to undo the zone several times in Congress and other places and failed. So now they had to pull this move in the Supreme Court, which, let's say, wasn't the most cleanest Supreme Court in the way they did it. And also they annulled the ZA rights retroactively, which is an enormous violation of legal norms anywhere in the world, including its own constitution of Honduras itself. So that is a move that's really, by any means of the imaginations, quite crazy, and we think really is illegal, right? So the next administration could very easily undo it. The current Honduran government is very unpopular. If it's a fair election, it's very unlikely they're going to be reelected. And in the meantime, we have no strong reason to believe that we can continue operating under ordinary Honduran laws. We have a commitment to this country. We want to make it work here. And I want to be able to tell the story in about a year or 1.5 years after the next election. We survived one of the most hostile possible administrations. So this is anti-fragile.
But despite the lawful complications behind it, Prospera has made a real name for itself in the US, particularly in emerging novel technologies.
I think of charter cities as testing grounds for new regulations and new technologies.
Patry Friedman was one of the early investors in Prospera and is the founder of Pronamos Capital, an organisation working to introduce more similar spaces, also known as charter cities, around the world.
I come from a software engineering background. I was at Google for 10 years, and at Google, we would rewrite every core technology every couple of years. There'd be new programming languages, new algorithms, new learnings from having run a system for a couple of years. And, I think the same thing applies to law. Like, when you just pass new legislation, you're just kind of you're patching the code base. You're making a few changes to a lot of pages of laws. And part of what charter cities let you do is start from a blank canvas and say, okay, let's try to put together something new. And the reason we're able to do that is we aren't forcing people to be in it. We're putting together something new, but then you have to go and choose to use that new legal system. And that choice is what gives you the freedom to redesign everything from scratch. And I just think that that's a critical part of innovation, is that freedom to regularly redesign everything from scratch.
Patry also believes they have the ability to elevate the lives of people in poorer countries.
What I've really been favoring lately is focusing on building for locals, and then because it's really hard to get people to move from the developed world. And, there's not that many nomads, and people have the idea that the people who can live anywhere, they'll live in our new place. But the people who can live anywhere can live in Lisbon or Bali or New York. And so you're competing with those places. So a lot of my focus these days is on projects where it's let's build for locals within the country, the people who would otherwise have to leave their homeland for better jobs. If we can bring capital and good institutions to them, then they don't have to leave. And then from there, attracting people from the region, maybe from nearby countries that are worse run. And then from there, trying to cause a reverse diaspora. Because the number one reason people move is jobs, and the number two is family reunification. So if you're trying to get someone to move away from their homeland, now you're going uphill in a sense. Whereas if you're getting people to move back home, tons of people from El Salvador have moved back since Bukele made it safe. Now you're actually going downhill with family reunification and bringing people home.
Someone else with their own business set up in the Honduran charter city is Mac Davis, founder of biotechnology firm MiniCircle, which is running clinical trials for various gene therapies.
So Prospera is this wonderful special economic zone project in Roatan. I was like, okay, I'm gonna get a flight down there and go check this out and see if it's real. I created a company, flew down, immediately had a ridiculously good time. Everyone there was so intelligent, and I was like, this is a good concentration of talent. And it was so beautiful, the architecture and the colors of the plants and the ocean. I was just like, this is it, we should do it here.
MiniCircle was one of the earliest businesses to set up in the special economic zone on the Honduran island. And Max said the process to set up trials there was drastically different to the standard procedure in the US.
They had the doors open, they wanted someone to do something there. At that time, they had only been officially open for that for less than a month. So I found it very easy to meet with my regulators, have those conversations. It didn't cost me a lot of money. With FDA, there's this multi-month process. It costs usually about $20K to get the first meeting, and then the second meeting can often be $150,000 of prep work. You're paying lawyers to both write and somehow magically get you to the front of the line in order to get an interview. I tried doing it without a lawyer, and it was not possible.
Mac's work on biotech is closely associated with the biohacking community, a group of medical mavericks who've long hailed the promise of DIY gene therapies, something we're exploring further in episode 2.
And that night I got in bed and was looking up at the ceiling and relaxing, going to sleep, and was like, wow, my mind feels incredibly clear. My vision is incredibly clear. That was the first moment, I was like, whoa, this is definitely working. It's doing something remarkable. So much changed for me. I think for the first time, it felt like I had become superhuman.
Come back next week to listen to episode 2 of Upgrading Humanity, a 4-part series exploring the subcultures and innovators that are setting the path for a better future. For more similar stories, sign up to our newsletters by tapping the link in the episode description.